Elara was dressed in white silk for one reason, to make the blood look prettier on the snow. Let that sink in for a moment. A village so desperate, so terrified of the monsters on the peak that they dressed their sacrifices in white. Not for dignity, not for honor, but for aesthetics. Because even death had to be beautiful when you were offering it to gods. For 100 years, the people of the valley had lived in the shadow of the peak. The eternal winter had frozen their crops, their hope, their humanity. And tonight, the debt was due. Elara wasn't the chosen one. Her sister was. Lyra, 16 years old, with lungs that rattled every winter and a smile that could make the baker's son blush. Lyra, who cried when the barn cat died. Lyra, who had stood in the square this morning, dressed in the same white silk, trembling as the elder read her name from the tithe scroll. But Elara was the one walking into the blizzard, her wrists bound in silver, offering herself to the monsters so the sun would rise again. She stepped into the ice citadel, expecting to feel teeth. She braced herself for the bite of a wolf or the slash of a claw. Instead, she felt heat. The air didn't smell like death. It smelled like crushed ice, expensive amber, and ancient power. And standing before her wasn't a beast. He was a titan, 7 feet of scarred muscle and royal armor, looming over her shivering form like a collapsing mountain. Elara squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the killing strike. But the strike never came. Instead, the floor shook as the monster fell to his knees. Now let me take you back 3 hours, to where this nightmare began. The cold had teeth. Elara felt them sink into her ribs as she climbed the frozen path. Each breath was a shard of glass carving through her lungs. The white silk dress, so soft when the elder had draped it over her shoulders, was now a death shroud. It clung to her skin, soaked through with snow, offering no protection against the wind that howled down from the peak like a starving animal. Her wrists ached beneath the silver bindings. The metal was ceremonial, meant to mark her as tribute, but all it did was bite into her flesh with every stumbling step. She kept her eyes on the ground, watching her bare feet turn blue against the snow. The elders had taken her shoes. Sacrifices don't need shoes, they'd said. The dead don't walk home. Behind her, the valley had already disappeared into the storm. She couldn't see the village lights anymore. Couldn't see the faces of the people who had pushed her toward this path with relief in their eyes. Better you than us. Better you than our daughters. Better her than Lyra. The thought burned hotter than the cold. Lyra would have died before she reached the first ridge, so Elara had stepped forward. She'd ripped the veil from her sister's hair and wrapped it around her own. She'd offered her wrists for the silver bindings and walked into the blizzard before anyone could stop her. The elders had tried to argue. The tithe must be a virgin, must be unmarried, must be between 15 and 20. But Elara had met every requirement. She was 20. She was unmarried. And she was walking toward her death with her eyes open. The wind screamed. Alara's knees buckled. She caught herself on a jagged rock, her palms splitting open against the ice. The pain was so sharp it dragged a gasp from her throat. Blood welled up, hot and red, and she watched it drip onto the snow, the first color she'd seen in hours. Get up. Her body didn't want to obey. Her muscles were seizing, her fingers numb, her heartbeat sluggish and wrong. But she forced herself to stand, because the alternative was freezing to death on the mountainside. And that wasn't why she'd come here. She'd come to end this. To pay the debt her people owed to the monsters of the peak, so the eternal winter would break and the valley could see spring again. She'd come to be devoured. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like relief. The obsidian gates appeared through the storm like a hallucination. They were massive, 30 feet tall, carved from black stone that gleamed like oil even in the dark. Ancient runes crawled across the surface, glowing faint blue, and the air around them hummed with power. Elara stared up at them, her vision blurring, and realized she couldn't feel her legs anymore. This is it. She opened her mouth to call out, to announce herself, but her voice cracked and died in her throat. The cold had stolen it. The cold had stolen everything. She was nothing but a shivering girl in a blood-stained dress, standing at the threshold of a nightmare. The gates groaned. The sound was deep, grinding, like the mountain itself was waking up. Elara's heart lurched. She tried to step back, but her legs locked, frozen in place. All she could do was watch as the obsidian gates swung open, revealing not a courtyard, not a den of bones, but a corridor of polished black stone lit by blue flame, and standing in the center of that corridor was him. The cold disappeared. Elara felt it like a physical shock the moment she crossed the threshold. The wind died. The ice melted from her skin, and the air shifted from cutting to warm. She sucked in a breath, and it didn't hurt. It tasted like crushed glaciers, expensive amber cologne, and something older than the mountain itself. It tasted like him. He was enormous. 7 feet of scarred muscle and cold ancient power, wrapped in black armor that looked like it had been forged from the same obsidian as the gates. His shoulders were broad enough to block out the corridor behind him. His hands. Gods. His hands were the size of her skull, and his face was carved from stone and shadow. Sharp jaw, brutal scars, eyes the color of a winter sky, pale and inhuman, locked onto her like she was the only living thing in the world. Elara's breath caught. She should have been afraid. She should have screamed or run or begged, but all she could do was stare at him. Her mind struggling to process the size of him, the weight of his presence, the way the blue flames dimmed when he stepped forward as if even fire bowed to him. He stopped 3 feet away, his eyes raked over her. The torn dress, the silver bindings, the blood on her hands, and something shifted in his expression. Not anger, not hunger, something worse. Shock. You. His voice was gravel scraping over ice, low and rough, and it vibrated through her bones. You walked here. Elara's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her tongue was still numb from the cold. The Titan's gaze dropped to her bare feet, and his jaw clenched so hard she heard his teeth grind. When he looked back up, his pale eyes were blazing. Where are your shoes? The question was so absurd. So human. Elara almost laughed, but the sound died in her chest because the Titan was moving, closing the distance between them in 2 massive strides. And she realized too late that she couldn't move. Her legs were shaking, her vision was swimming. The warmth that had felt like salvation 30 seconds ago now felt like a cruel joke, because her body was thawing. And with the thaw came the pain. Her knees buckled. The Titan caught her before she hit the ground. His hands, those massive, terrifying hands, wrapped around her waist. Elara's ribs creaked under the pressure. She gasped, her fingers scrabbling weakly at his armored chest. But he wasn't hurting her. He was holding her, cradling her against him like she was made of glass. His grip firm but trembling, and the heat radiating from his body was so intense it made her skin prickle. Fragile, he muttered. The word sounded like a curse. He shifted her weight, one arm sliding beneath her knees, lifting her off the ground as if she weighed nothing. Gods! You're freezing! Elara tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too hard. All she could do was stare up at him, at the brutal lines of his face, at the way his pale eyes kept darting down to her as if he expected her to shatter in his arms. He inhaled. The sound was sharp, deliberate. Elara felt his entire body go rigid. His nostrils flared, his pupils dilated, and when he exhaled, the breath came out ragged, almost desperate. Cinnamon, he whispered. His voice cracked. Old books, warm skin. Elara's heart stuttered. He's smelling me. You're not. He stopped, his jaw working. And then he tilted his head back and roared. The sound was deafening. It echoed through the corridor, shaking the walls. Elara flinched against his chest as the blue flames flared brighter. She didn't understand. She didn't understand any of this. She'd been sent here to die, to be torn apart by monsters. But this Titan wasn't tearing her apart. He was holding her like she was precious. Footsteps thundered down the corridor. 2 more figures emerged from the shadows, both of them just as massive as the first. The one on the left was built like a battering ram, broad, scarred, with wild dark hair and eyes that glowed faint orange. He smelled like worn leather, steel, and blood orange, sharp and aggressive. When he saw Elara in the first Titan's arms, he snarled, "What the hell is that?" "The tribute," the first Titan said. His voice was tight. "She's freezing, Theron." She walked the entire path in. He stopped, his gaze dropping to her bare feet, his expression twisted into something murderous. "She has no shoes." Theron's snarl cut off. He stepped closer, his nostrils flaring as he inhaled her scent. His eyes widened. "She smells like life." The third Titan said it. He was leaner than the other two, tall and sharp-edged, with silver-streaked hair and eyes the color of smoke. His scent hit Elara like a slap: dried sage, burning parchment, and ozone, electric and strange. When he looked at her, his gaze was clinical, curious. He moved closer, his fingers lifting toward her face. The first Titan growled, "Don't touch her, Soren." Soren's hand paused an inch from her cheek. "I'm just checking her temperature, Kaelin. She's human. She's fragile. You'll break her." "I won't. You'll break her." The words were a command, vibrating with power. Soren's hand dropped immediately, but he didn't step back. His smoke-colored eyes stayed locked on Elara, studying her like she was a puzzle. Then he inhaled deeply. His expression shifted into something that looked almost like awe. "She's warm," Soren murmured. "Kaelin, look at your hand." Kaelin, the first Titan, the one holding her, glanced down and froze. Elara followed his gaze. His right hand was wrapped around her waist. His fingers splayed across her ribs. And where his skin touched the white silk of her dress, something was changing. The gray was fading. The stone-like texture that had covered his knuckles was receding, turning back into flesh. The cracks along his fingers were sealing shut. He stared at it like he was watching a miracle. "Heat," Theron breathed. He stepped closer, his hand lifting toward Elara's shoulder, but he stopped himself, his fingers hovering an inch away as if he didn't trust himself to touch. "She's radiating heat." Soren's gaze sharpened. "She's not just warm. She's a catalyst." Kaelin's arms tightened around Elara, pulling her closer against his chest. The movement was so possessive it made her pulse spike. "We need to get her inside," he said. His voice was rough. "She's hypothermic." Theron was already moving, his massive frame disappearing back down the corridor. "I'll get the fires going in the east wing." "And blankets," Kaelin called after him. "Furs," carefully. "Theron, don't knock anything over." Soren was still staring at Elara, his expression unreadable. "You carried her all the way from the gates." She collapsed at the gates. Kaelin's jaw clenched. "The elders sent her up here with no shoes. Soren, no coat, just this." He gestured sharply at the white silk dress, and his voice turned lethal. "Ceremonial, sacrificial bullshit." Soren's eyes darkened. "They expected us to kill her. They expected us to eat her." Elara's vision was starting to blur again. The warmth, the voices, the sheer absurdity of three enormous Titans arguing about blankets. It was too much. Her head lolled against Kaelin's chest. She felt his heartbeat beneath her cheek. Slow, steady, alive. "She's losing consciousness," Soren said sharply. "Kaelin." "I know." Kaelin started walking, his strides long and controlled. Elara felt the world tilt as he carried her deeper into the citadel. "Stay with me, little fire. Just a bit longer. Little fire." The nickname echoed in Elara's fading mind. Soft and strange. She wanted to ask why he'd called her that. Wanted to ask why they weren't killing her. Wanted to ask why the monster who should have devoured her was instead cradling her like something precious. But the warmth was pulling her under, and the last thing she felt before the darkness took her was the steady rhythm of Kaelin's heartbeat and the impossible heat of his skin against hers. Warmth. That was the first thing Elara felt when consciousness dragged her back from the dark. A heat so profound it made her skin prickle, her muscles uncoil, her lungs expand with air that didn't burn. She was warm. Not the fragile, fleeting warmth of a dying fire, but the deep, bone-soaking heat of a summer afternoon that had somehow found its way into her blood. Her eyes fluttered open. The ceiling above her was vaulted stone, ancient and black, carved with intricate patterns that glowed faint blue in the firelight. She blinked, her vision sharpening. She wasn't staring at a dungeon. She was staring at something that looked like a king's bedchamber. High arched windows draped in thick furs. Walls lined with towering bookshelves. A fireplace so massive she could have walked into it without ducking. The bed beneath her was obscene, piled high with furs and silk, soft enough to swallow her whole, and warm. Warm in a way that made her want to sink back into the pillows and never move again. But her instincts were screaming at her to get up, to assess, to understand where the hell she was and why she was still alive. Elara pushed herself upright, her muscles protesting. She immediately regretted it. The room tilted. Her head swam. She pressed a hand to her temple, breathing through the dizziness. And that's when she noticed her wrists. The silver bindings were gone. In their place were faint red marks. The skin raw but clean. Someone had wrapped them in soft linen bandages. She stared at them, her heart picking up speed. Then looked down at herself. The white silk dress was gone too. She was wearing something else now. A loose, oversized tunic made of dark wool, soft against her skin, and it smelled like crushed glacial ice and expensive amber. Kaelin. The realization hit her like a fist to the chest. She was wearing his clothes, which meant someone had undressed her. Someone had seen her bare skin, her scars, the birthmark on her ribs. "You're awake." Elara's head snapped toward the voice. Soren was standing in the doorway, his tall frame backlit by the corridor's blue flames, his silver-streaked hair catching the light. He didn't move closer, just watched her with those smoke-colored eyes, his expression calm but unreadable. The scent of dried sage and burning parchment rolled into the room like a wave. Elara's throat closed. She tried to speak, but her voice came out rough, cracked from disuse. "Where?" "The East Wing," Soren said. His voice was smooth, clinical, like he was reciting a diagnosis. "Kaelin's personal chambers. You've been unconscious for 6 hours. Your core temperature dropped to dangerous levels on the mountain. We had to." He paused, his gaze flicking to the oversized tunic she was wearing. Something that might have been guilt crossed his face. "We had to remove the wet silk. It was making you colder." Elara's hands fisted in the blankets. "You undressed me." Karen did. Soren's tone didn't change. He was the least likely to accidentally break your ribs. "Kaelin wouldn't let me near you." And he was too. He trailed off, his jaw tightening. Unstable. Soren stepped into the room, moving with the careful precision of someone navigating around something fragile. Elara realized with a jolt that she was the fragile thing. He stopped at the foot of the bed, his hands clasped behind his back. "You terrified him," Soren said quietly. "He carried you for 3 miles through the citadel, refusing to let anyone else touch you. And when your heartbeat started to slow, Soren stopped, exhaled. "He nearly tore the East Wing apart, trying to find enough furs to keep you warm." Elara stared at him. "Why?" "Because you're warm." Soren's gaze sharpened. He tilted his head like he was studying her under a microscope. "You radiate heat in a way we haven't felt in 5 centuries. When Kaelin held you, the stone on his hand receded. Do you understand what that means?" "No." Elara's voice was flat. "I don't understand any of this. I was sent here to die. To be eaten," the elders said. "The elders are idiots." Soren's tone turned cutting. "They send us a tribute every 100 years because they think it appeases us. They think we're monsters who feed on human flesh to sustain the winter. They're wrong. Then what are you?" The question hung in the air. Sharp and dangerous. Soren's expression shifted into something that looked almost like pain. But before he could answer, the door slammed open. Theron filled the doorway like a storm, his broad shoulders nearly brushing the frame, his wild dark hair falling into his eyes. He smelled like worn leather and blood orange, sharp and aggressive. When his gaze locked onto Elara, the intensity made her pulse spike. "She's awake," he growled. It wasn't a question. He stepped into the room, his boots heavy on the stone floor. Soren moved aside without a word. "Good. You need to eat." Elara's stomach twisted. "I'm not hungry. You haven't eaten in 12 hours. Theron stopped at the side of the bed, looming over her, Elara had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. They were glowing. Faint orange. Inhuman. The way he was looking at her, like she was something small and breakable that he needed to protect, made her skin prickle. "You're going to eat. Or I'm going to make you." "Theron," Soren said sharply. "You're scaring her. I'm feeding her. You're growling at her like she's prey." Theron's jaw clenched. He made a visible effort to soften his expression. It didn't work. He still looked like a predator barely holding himself back. When he set a tray down on the bed beside her, his hands were shaking. Elara glanced at the tray. Bread, cheese, dried fruit, a cup of something that smelled like honey and warm spices. It looked normal. Too normal. "You're not going to eat me." "No." Theron's voice was rough. "We're not. Then why did the elders send me here?" "Because they're fools who don't understand what we are." Theron sat down on the edge of the bed, slowly, carefully, like he was afraid the mattress would collapse under his weight. Elara felt the entire frame dip. "They think the tithe is a blood sacrifice. It's not. It's supposed to be a bond." Elara's breath caught. "A bond. A connection," Soren said from the foot of the bed, "between the citadel and the valley. For centuries, we protected the people below. We controlled the weather, kept the winters mild, ensured the harvests. In return, they sent us a tribute, someone who would live here with us and anchor the magic. But 100 years ago, the bond broke. The tribute they sent." He stopped, his expression darkening. She was terrified. She ran, and when she fell from the cliffs trying to escape, the magic snapped. The winter became eternal. Elara's mind was racing. "So you've been waiting for another tribute." "We've been dying," Theron said bluntly. He held up his hand. Elara's stomach dropped. His fingers were gray, cracked. The skin looked like stone, rough and lifeless. When he flexed them, she heard the grinding sound of rock scraping against rock. "We're turning to stone, little scholar. From the inside out. And you?" He lowered his hand, his gaze burning into hers. "You're the first person in a century who's made it stop." Elara ate because she didn't know what else to do. The bread was warm, the cheese sharp. The drink tasted like liquid fire, honey and cinnamon and something herbal that made her head feel clearer. Theron watched her the entire time, his orange eyes tracking every bite. When she finally set the cup down, he exhaled like he'd been holding his breath. "Good," he muttered. He stood, the bed creaking under the shift of his weight. He looked at Soren. "She needs more blankets." "She has 12 blankets, Theron. She needs more." Soren pinched the bridge of his nose. "She's not cold anymore. Look at her. She's flushed." Theron's gaze snapped back to Elara, raking over her face. His expression twisted into something almost panicked. "She's flushed because she's sick. Humans get sick when. She's flushed because you've turned this room into a furnace." Soren gestured at the fireplace, where flames were roaring high enough to lick the stone chimney. "If you add any more wood, she's going to pass out from the heat. Then open a window. It's a blizzard outside. Then, enough." The voice cut through the argument like a blade, cold and absolute. Both Theron and Soren went silent. Elara's head turned toward the doorway, her pulse spiking. And there he was, Kalen. He looked different in the firelight. Less like a monster and more like a king, broad-shouldered and brutal. His black armor replaced with a simple tunic that did nothing to hide the sheer size of him. His pale eyes found hers immediately. The relief that flashed across his face was so raw it made her chest tighten. "You're awake," he said quietly. He stepped into the room, his movements controlled, deliberate. The scent of crushed ice and amber rolled over her like a wave. "How do you feel?" Elara's throat was dry, confused. Kalen's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "That's fair." He glanced at Theron and Soren, his expression hardening. "Out! Both of you." Theron bristled. "She just woke up. She needs space." Kalen's voice dropped into a growl, low and commanding. Elara felt the air in the room shift. "You're overwhelming her. Out." Soren left without argument. his smoke-colored eyes flicking to Elara one last time before he disappeared into the corridor. Theron hesitated, his jaw working, but eventually he followed, pausing at the door to glare at Kaelin. "Don't scare her," Theron said. "I'm not the one growling at her like a feral wolf. You collapsed in the hallway because you wouldn't let go of her." Kaelin's expression went blank. Theron smirked before disappearing into the shadows. The door clicked shut. Suddenly, the room felt smaller, quieter. Elara was alone with the Titan who had carried her through a blizzard, and she had no idea what to say. Kaelin moved to the chair beside the bed, a massive thing built for someone his size. He sat down with a control that made her think he was afraid of breaking it. He rested his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. When he looked at her, his pale eyes were softer than she'd expected. "I owe you an apology," he said. Elara blinked. "For what?" "For not meeting you at the gate sooner. For letting you walk that path alone." His jaw tightened. "The wards should have alerted us the moment you stepped onto the mountain. But the magic is failing. By the time I felt the disturbance, you were already at the obsidian gates. Freezing. Barefoot." His voice turned lethal. "They sent you up here to die." "I know." Elara's hands twisted in the blankets. "That was the point. The elders said the tithe had to be willing, that the sacrifice had to walk into death with open eyes or it wouldn't appease the monsters." Kaelin flinched like she'd struck him. "We're not monsters." "Then what are you?" He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze dropping to his hands. Slowly, he unclenched his fists and held them up for her to see. The right hand, the one that had touched her, was flesh and blood. The skin scarred but whole. The left hand was gray stone. The fingers cracked, the knuckles rough. When he flexed them, Elara heard that same grinding sound Theron had made. "We're dying," Kaelin said quietly. "The hollow frost curse. It's turning us to stone from the inside out. Slowly, painfully. And when it reaches our hearts," he stopped, exhaled, "we'll be statues, frozen forever in the citadel we were supposed to protect." Elara stared at his hands. "But when you touched me, it stopped. It receded." Kaelin lowered his hands, his expression unreadable. "For the first time in 500 years, the stone receded. I don't know why. Soren thinks it's because you're warm, because you radiate heat in a way that counters the frost. But it's more than that. When I carried you, when I held you," he stopped, his voice roughening. "I felt alive again." The words hung between them, heavy and dangerous. Elara's pulse was thundering in her ears. She wanted to ask how it was possible, wanted to ask what he expected from her. But before she could speak, Kaelin stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the stone. "You should rest," he said. His tone was controlled again, distant. "The curse has weakened you. You need time to recover." "I'm not weak." The words came out sharper than she intended. Kaelin's gaze snapped to hers. "I walked up that mountain because I chose to. I didn't collapse because I'm fragile. I collapsed because your people sent me to die in a blizzard with no shoes." Something flickered in Kaelin's eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or approval. "You're right. You're not weak." He moved toward the door, his hand resting on the handle, and then he paused, looked back at her. "But you are small, breakable, and if we're not careful, we will hurt you. So forgive us if we treat you like glass, little fire. We don't know how else to keep you alive." He left before she could respond. Elara didn't sleep. She lay in the oversized bed, surrounded by furs and firelight, and stared at the ceiling until her eyes burned. Her mind wouldn't stop racing. The Titans weren't monsters. They were cursed, and somehow, impossibly, she was the key to breaking that curse. But that didn't make sense. She was nobody. A village scholar who spent her days cataloging books and her nights reading by candlelight. She wasn't special. She wasn't magic. So why did her touch heal them? The question gnawed at her, relentless, until she couldn't stand it anymore. She threw off the blankets and swung her legs over the side of the bed, her bare feet hitting the cold stone floor. The oversized tunic hung to her knees. She tugged it down, her heart pounding, and then stood. The room didn't spin. Her legs held. Good. She moved to the door and pressed her ear against the wood. Listening. Silence. No footsteps. No voices. Slowly, she eased the door open and peered into the corridor. The citadel was a labyrinth of black stone and blue flame, massive and empty. The air smelled like ancient power and frozen earth. Elara stepped into the corridor, her bare feet silent on the stone, and started walking. She didn't have a plan. She just needed to move, to see, to understand what kind of place she'd been brought to. The corridors branched and twisted, leading her deeper into the citadel. And with every turn, the temperature dropped. The warmth of Kaelin's chambers faded, replaced by a cold that bit at her skin. Elara wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. She should have gone back, should have stayed in the bed where it was safe, but she didn't, because ahead of her, at the end of a long, dark corridor, there was a door, and it was open. Elara's instincts screamed at her to turn around, but her feet kept moving, carrying her toward the doorway. When she stepped through, her breath caught. It was a gallery, massive and circular, with a domed ceiling carved from obsidian, and the walls were lined with them, statues, dozens of them. Maybe 100, all of them titans, enormous. 7 feet tall, frozen mid-motion with expressions of agony carved into their stone faces. Some were reaching out, their hands outstretched. Others were collapsed on their knees, their heads bowed, and all of them had the same gray, cracked skin that Elara had seen on Kaelin's hand. Her stomach turned. They're beautiful, aren't they? Elara spun, her heart leaping into her throat. Kaelin was standing in the doorway, his pale eyes locked on the statues, his expression unreadable. He moved into the gallery, his boots echoing on the stone. He stopped beside one of the frozen titans, a female. She was tall, regal, her hand pressed to her chest as if she'd been trying to claw the stone out of her own heart. "This is Leora," Kaelin said quietly. She was Soren's sister, a healer. She turned to stone 50 years ago, trying to save a child who'd wandered into the citadel during a storm. He moved to the next statue. A male, broad and scarred, his face twisted in rage. Rokan, Theron's blood brother. He turned during the last battle with the frost wraiths, fought until his sword arm locked mid-swing. Elara's throat closed. How many? 214. Kaelin's voice was flat. This is what's left of the Winter Court. The strongest alphas in the realm, reduced to stone and silence. He turned to look at her, his pale eyes burning. This is what happens when the bond breaks, when there's no anchor to hold the magic. And this. He held up his left hand, the gray stone spreading past his wrist. This is what's happening to us. Elara took a step back, her pulse racing. You brought me here to guilt me. I brought you here to show you the truth. Kaelin lowered his hand, his expression hardening. You think we're monsters who want to devour you. You think this is a cage. But look around, Elara. This is the cage. We're prisoners in our own bodies, watching ourselves turn to stone, piece by piece. And you? His voice cracked. You're the first person in 500 years who's made the curse stop. Elara's back hit the wall. I didn't ask for this. I know. Kaelin moved closer, his massive frame towering over her. But he stopped 3 feet away, close enough to touch, but not touching. You didn't ask to be sent up that mountain. You didn't ask to save your sister. You didn't ask to be warm enough to heal us. But you are, and I'm not going to apologize for wanting to survive. What do you want from me? Elara's voice broke. You want me to stay here? To warm you like a fireplace? Kaelin's jaw clenched. I want you to understand that we're not going to hurt you. We're not going to eat you or lock you in a dungeon or drain you dry. He stopped, exhaled. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, almost desperate. We just want to feel alive again, even if it's only for a little while. Elara stared at him, at the way his stone-cracked hand was trembling, at the raw, aching hope in his eyes. Something in her chest twisted. I need air, she whispered. Kalen stepped aside immediately, his expression shuddering. The doors are warded. You can't leave the citadel without one of us. Elara's blood went cold. So I am a prisoner. You're protected. Kalen's voice turned hard. The mountain is crawling with frost wraiths and ice drakes. If you step outside these walls without an escort, you'll be dead in minutes. I'm not keeping you here because I want to cage you, Elara. I'm keeping you here because I don't want to find your frozen corpse in the snow. He turned and walked out of the gallery, his footsteps echoing into silence. Elara was left alone with the statues and the crushing weight of the truth. She wasn't a sacrifice. She was a lifeline, and the Titans weren't going to let her go. Elara learned to live in the spaces between them. The first 3 days were a careful dance. Her staying in Kalen's chambers, them bringing her food and books, checking on her like she was made of spun glass. Theron would appear at dawn with breakfast, his orange eyes tracking her every movement, his jaw clenched like he was holding back a growl. Soren would arrive in the afternoons with tea and questions, his clinical gaze studying her like she was a puzzle he needed to solve. And Kalen came at night, when the fires burned low and the cold crept back into the stone. He would sit in the chair by her bed and simply watch her. It should have felt invasive, suffocating. Instead, it felt like being seen. On the 4th day, Elara left the East Wing. She didn't ask permission. She simply walked out of Kalen's chambers, her bare feet silent on the stone, and started exploring. The citadel was massive, a sprawling maze of corridors and galleries, libraries stacked with ancient texts, armories filled with weapons that looked like they'd been forged before the valley even existed. And everywhere she went, the air was cold. Not the killing cold of the mountain, but a deep, bone-singing chill that made her breath mist and her skin prickle. She found Soren in what he called the archive, a circular room with shelves that spiraled up 3 stories, filled with scrolls and books bound in leather so old it cracked when touched. He was bent over a desk, his silver-streaked hair falling into his eyes. When Elara entered, he didn't look up. The heating ritual failed again, he said, his voice tight. The wards are fracturing. The magic that's supposed to regulate the temperature is collapsing. Elara moved closer, her gaze catching on the scrolls spread across the desk. They were covered in runes she didn't recognize, diagrams of the citadel overlaid with lines of power. Can you fix it? Not without the bond. Soren finally looked at her, his smoke-colored eyes shadowed. The magic is anchored to the tribute. When the last one died, the connection severed. We've been running on residual power ever since, but it's fading. In another year, maybe 2, the citadel will freeze completely, and we'll be statues long before that. What if I stayed? Soren went still. What? What if I stayed? The words tumbled out before she could stop them. You said the bond needs an anchor, that the tribute is supposed to live here. What if I agreed to that? Soren stood slowly, his expression unreadable. You don't understand what you're offering. Then explain it to me. The bond isn't just proximity, Elara. It's not just living in the same building. He moved around the desk, his movements careful, controlled. It's a soul bind, a magical tether between you and the citadel, between you and us. It would make you immortal, but it would also tie you here forever. You couldn't leave, not without killing us, and yourself in the process. Elara's pulse stuttered. Forever, forever. Soren's voice softened. And it would require contact. Regular, sustained contact. The magic feeds on warmth, on connection, on. He stopped, his jaw tightening. On touch, touch, skin to skin. Soren's gaze dropped to his hands. One flesh, one stone. He flexed his fingers like he was testing the limits of his body. We would need to hold you frequently, to absorb the heat you radiate and channel it into the wards. It's not. He looked back at her, his expression raw. It's not a gentle process. It's invasive, intimate. And I won't lie to you and pretend it's anything other than what it is. Elara's mouth was dry. You're asking me to be a human furnace. I'm asking you to save our lives. Soren's voice cracked. But I'm also telling you the cost. Because if you agree to this, there's no going back. And I need you to understand that before you make a choice you'll regret. Elara stared at him, at the desperate honesty in his eyes, at the way his stone-cracked hand was trembling. Something in her chest, something she didn't want to name, ached. "Show me," she whispered. Soren's breath hitched. "What?" "Show me what it means." "The contact. The feeding." She stepped closer, her heart pounding. "I need to know what I'm agreeing to." Soren didn't move. For a long moment, he just looked at her, his smoke-colored eyes searching hers. Then he nodded. Slowly, carefully, he raised his right hand, the one that was still flesh. He held it out, palm up. An offering. Elara placed her hand in his. The heat was immediate. She felt it rush up her arm, a golden warmth that radiated from her skin into his. Soren gasped. His fingers closed around hers, gentle but desperate. She watched as the gray stone on his left hand began to recede. Slowly, inch by inch, the cracks sealing, the rough texture smoothing back into scarred flesh. "Gods," Soren breathed. His voice was shaking. You're burning." Elara felt it too. A pull, like something deep in her chest was unspooling, flowing out through her skin and into him, and it didn't hurt. It felt right. Like her body had been waiting for this. Like she'd been built for this exact purpose. Soren's grip tightened. His eyes fluttered shut. "You have no idea what this feels like. Tell me." He stopped, his breath coming faster. "Like I've been frozen for 500 years and you're the first spark of fire I've felt. Like I'm waking up after centuries of sleep. His voice broke. "Like I want to pull you closer and never let go." Elara's pulse was thundering. "Then do it." Soren's eyes snapped open. The hunger in them made her breath catch. But he didn't move. Didn't pull her closer. Instead, he released her hand like it burned him and stepped back, his chest heaving. "No," he said hoarsely. "Not like this. Not when you don't fully understand. Not when—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "Ask Kalen. He'll explain better than I can." He left before she could respond, his footsteps echoing into the archive's silence. Elara was left staring at her hand, at the warmth still tingling across her palm, wondering what the hell she'd just agreed to. She found Kalen in the training yard, a massive open courtyard carved into the mountainside, overlooking the valley below. He was shirtless despite the cold, his scarred torso gleaming with sweat, moving through combat forms with a sword that looked like it had been forged for a giant. Each strike was controlled, brutal, precise. Elara stopped at the edge of the yard, her breath misting in the freezing air, watching him. He was beautiful in the way a mountain was beautiful, harsh and unforgiving and impossible to look away from. The stone had spread further up his left arm now. Creeping past his elbow, she could see the way he favored his right side, compensating for the weight of the curse. He stopped mid-swing when he saw her. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. His voice rough, he lowered the sword, his chest still heaving. "It's too cold. I'm fine." Elara stepped into the yard, her bare feet crunching on the frost-covered stone. "Soren told me about the bond. About what it would require." Kalen went still. And I want to try. The feeding. I want to see if it works." Something flashed in Kalen's pale eyes. Hope, maybe. Or fear. He set the sword down carefully, like he didn't trust himself to hold it. "It's not just feeding, Elara. He stopped, his jaw working. "It's intimate. More intimate than you're imagining. And I don't." His voice dropped. "I don't trust myself not to take too much." "Then don't take too much." Elara moved closer, her pulse racing. "Just show me. Please." Kalen stared at her for a long moment, his expression torn. Then he nodded. He moved to the bench at the edge of the yard and sat down, his massive frame making the stone look small. He gestured for her to come closer. Elara's legs were shaking, but she forced herself to move, to stand in front of him, close enough that she could smell the crushed ice and amber that clung to his skin. close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Sit," Kalen said quietly. "Where?" His gaze flicked to his lap. Elara's stomach flipped, but she didn't hesitate. She climbed onto the bench, straddling his thighs. The moment her weight settled against him, Kalen's hands came up to grip her waist. Gently. So gently, it made her chest ache. "Tell me if it's too much," he murmured. His thumbs brushed against the fabric of the oversized tunic. His tunic. She felt the warmth radiating between them like a living thing. "Tell me if you want me to stop. I will." Kalen's hand slid beneath the tunic, his palms pressing against her bare skin. Elara gasped. The heat was overwhelming. Not painful, but intense. Like her entire body had become a conduit for fire. She felt it pour out of her. Into him. Kalen's head fell back, his eyes squeezing shut, a ragged groan tearing from his throat. "Fuck," he breathed. His grip tightened, his fingers digging into her waist. She felt his entire body shudder. "Elara, you're gods. You're perfect." She couldn't speak, couldn't think. All she could do was feel. The way his hands trembled against her skin, the way his breath came in ragged gasps, the way the stone on his left arm was receding, turning back into flesh, inch by agonizing inch. "Don't stop," Kalen whispered. His forehead dropped to her shoulder. She felt the heat of his breath against her neck. "Please don't stop." Elara's hands came up to his shoulders, anchoring herself. She let the warmth flow, let it pour out of her like water from a dam, and Kalen held her through it. His massive frame curled around hers, protective and desperate, and so careful not to hurt her. When it finally ebbed, when the pull faded and the warmth settled back into her chest, Kalen lifted his head. His pale eyes were glassy, his expression raw. When he looked at his left hand, fully flesh now. No gray, no cracks. His breath hitched. "It worked," he whispered. "Elara, it worked." She smiled, exhausted and dizzy and weirdly euphoric. "Told you." Kalen's laugh was broken. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "You're going to save us," he murmured into her hair. "You're going to save all of us." Elara closed her eyes and let herself sink into his warmth. She didn't see the storm gathering in the valley below. The blizzard hit the valley 3 days later. Elara felt it before she saw it. A shift in the air, a pressure building against the citadel's wards. When she looked out the window of the library, her stomach dropped. The sky over the valley was black, not the natural black of a storm, but an unnatural, roiling darkness that pressed down on the village like a fist. "It's getting worse," Soren said from behind her. He'd come to find her when the wards started fracturing, his expression grim. "The winter is intensifying. The people below, they're not going to survive another week like this." Elara's hands pressed against the cold glass. "Why?" "I thought the feeding was working. Kalen's arm is healed. Theron's fingers are flesh again. The curse is receding, because we've been distracted." Soren's voice was tight. "The weather rituals require focus, power, and for the past week, all of our energy has been channeled into absorbing your warmth. Instead of maintaining the wards that regulate the valley's climate, we're healing, but the people below are freezing." Guilt twisted in Elara's chest. "So fix it. Perform the ritual." "We can't." Soren moved to stand beside her, his gaze fixed on the storm. "Not without risking the progress we've made. If we channel power into the wards now, the curse will accelerate again. We'll turn to stone before we can complete the bond. So the valley suffers. The valley survives." Soren's jaw clenched. "They've endured 100 years of eternal winter. They can endure a few more weeks while we..." The alarm bell shattered the air. Elara's head snapped toward the sound, a deep, resonant toll that echoed through the citadel like a heartbeat. Soren's expression went cold. "They're here." "Who?" "The villagers." Soren was already moving, striding toward the door. "They're at the gates." The courtyard was chaos. Elara ran behind Soren, her bare feet slipping on the icy stone. When they burst through the doors into the main courtyard, her breath caught. The obsidian gates were open. Not by choice. By force. The runes were smoking. Shattered. Through the gap poured men. Not villagers. Mercenaries. They were clad in iron armor, their faces hidden behind helms, moving with the brutal efficiency of trained killers. Ironcasters. Elara had heard of them. Mercenaries from the southern cities who specialized in breaking magical wards, in killing things that couldn't be killed by normal means. And leading them were the elders. Elara recognized Elder Thorn immediately, the man who had bound her wrists in silver, who had sent her up the mountain to die. He stood at the front of the group, his face twisted with rage. When he saw her standing beside Soren, his eyes narrowed. There she is. Thorn's voice carried across the courtyard, sharp and accusing. The sacrifice who refuses to die. Soren stepped in front of Elara, his body a wall between her and the Ironcasters. You breached the citadel wards. That's an act of war, Thorn. War? Thorn laughed, bitter and cold. You think we're afraid of monsters who can barely stand? Look at you. Half turned to stone, clinging to life by draining a girl's warmth. You're pathetic. Leave. Soren's voice dropped into a growl. Now, before I forget the oaths that bind me to your people, we're not leaving without her. Thorn pointed at Elara. The Ironcasters shifted, their hands moving to the weapons at their belts. The winter is worse. The crops are failing. Children are dying, and it's because the sacrifice didn't work. She's supposed to be dead, but instead she's here, playing house with monsters. Elara's blood turned to ice. You want to kill me? We want to fix this. Thorn's expression was cold. The old texts say the tithe must be willing, must walk into death with open eyes. But you didn't die. You survived. And that broke the magic. So we're going to finish what should have been done a week ago. We're going to spill your blood on the altar, and the winter will end. No, the word was a snarl. Theron appeared from the shadows like a nightmare made flesh. His orange eyes were blazing, his fangs bared. The scent of worn leather and blood orange rolled over the courtyard like a wave. You're not touching her. Thorn's hand lifted. The Ironcasters surged forward. Theron moved like a storm. Elara had never seen anything like it. The sheer brutal speed of him, the way his body shifted and twisted, claws extending from his fingertips, his roar shaking the stone beneath her feet. He hit the first Ironcaster like a battering ram, his claws tearing through armor like it was parchment. Blood sprayed across the snow. The mercenaries scattered, shouting commands, raising weapons. But Theron didn't slow. He was a whirlwind of teeth and claws and rage, every swing lethal. An Ironcaster lunged at him with a sword. Theron caught the blade with his bare hand, the iron sizzling against his skin, and ripped the weapon from the man's grip before driving his claws through the mercenary's chest. Theron! Soren's shout was desperate. Don't kill them all. We need answers. They came for her. Theron's voice was barely human, guttural and savage. He hurled the body aside like it weighed nothing. They don't get answers. They get death. Another Ironcaster raised a crossbow, aiming for Elara. Kaelin appeared between them. He didn't speak, didn't roar. He simply moved, one massive hand closing around the crossbow and crushing it into scrap metal, the other hand gripping the mercenary's throat and lifting him off the ground. The man choked, his legs kicking. Kaelin's pale eyes were glacial. You pointed a weapon at her, Kaelin said quietly. That was a mistake. He threw the man into the courtyard wall. The impact was sickening. The mercenary crumpled. Unconscious or dead, Kaelin turned back to Elara. His hands found her shoulders, his grip firm but gentle. He pulled her behind him, shielding her with his body. Don't move, he said, his voice low. Don't run. Stay with me. Elara nodded, her heart hammering. Kaelin turned back to face the Ironcasters. There were still a dozen of them, circling, weapons raised. Elder Thorn was shouting something about cleansing fire and divine justice, but none of it mattered, because Theron was tearing through them like they were made of paper, and Soren was moving through the chaos with surgical precision. disarming mercenaries with flicks of his wrist, his magic crackling in the air like lightning. It was over in minutes. The courtyard was littered with bodies, some dead, some groaning, all of them broken. The remaining Ironcasters were fleeing back through the shattered gates, dragging Elder Thorn with them. Theron stood in the center of the carnage, blood dripping from his claws, his chest heaving. When he looked at Elara, his orange eyes were still feral. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, barely controlled. "No." Elara's voice shook. "I'm fine." "Good." Theron's claws retracted slowly, his hands flexing. He looked down at the blood coating his skin like he was seeing it for the first time. "Good." Kaelin's hands were still on Elara's shoulders, his grip trembling. When she looked up at him, his expression was raw. "They tried to kill you," he said quietly. "They came into our home and tried to kill you. I know. They'll come back." Soren appeared beside them, his smoke-colored eyes dark. "Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But they'll come back. And next time, they'll bring more Ironcasters. More weapons. They won't stop until you're dead. Or we're statues." Elara's chest tightened. "So what do we do?" Kaelin's jaw clenched. "We finish the bond. Tonight. Before they have a chance to attack again." Soren's gaze sharpened. "Kaelin, she's not ready. She's dying if we don't." Kaelin's voice turned lethal. "You saw them. You heard Thorn. They think her blood on an altar will end the winter. They're not going to stop until she's a corpse. So we bind her to the citadel. We make her immortal. And we make damn sure no one can ever take her from us again." Elara looked between them. At Theron, still covered in blood, his eyes burning with protective fury. At Soren, his expression torn between logic and desperation. At Kaelin, his hands trembling on her shoulders, his pale eyes begging her to say yes. She realized she'd already made her choice, days ago. The moment Kaelin had knelt before her in the citadel, the moment Soren had shown her the statue gallery, the moment Theron had fought an army to keep her safe. She wasn't a prisoner. She was theirs. "Do it," Elara whispered. "Bind me. Tonight." Kaelin's eyes closed, relief flooding his expression. He pulled her into his chest, his arms wrapping around her like he'd never let go. "Thank you," he breathed into her hair. "Thank you." Elara closed her eyes and let herself believe she'd made the right choice. Even as the storm outside grew darker, even as the valley below screamed for her blood, Kaelin collapsed 30 seconds after the Ironcasters fled. Elara felt it before she saw it. The way his hands on her shoulders suddenly went rigid, the way his breath hitched, sharp and wrong. And then his weight was falling, his massive frame tilting forward like a mountain losing its foundation. "Kaelin." She tried to catch him, her hands scrabbling against his chest. But he was 7 feet of solid muscle, and she was nothing. He would have crushed her if Theron hadn't appeared, his blood-slicked hands gripping Kaelin's shoulders and hauling him upright. "I've got him." Theron's voice was tight, strained. "Zoran." Now, Soren was already moving, his smoke-colored eyes sharp and clinical as he pressed his fingers to Kaelin's throat, checking his pulse, his heartbeats erratic. The exertion from the fight. It accelerated the curse. He pulled back Kaelin's tunic. Elara's stomach dropped. The stone had spread. It wasn't just his left arm anymore. The gray, cracked texture was crawling across his chest, like frost on a window, creeping toward his heart in jagged, branching lines. She could see it pulsing beneath his skin, spreading with each labored breath. The sight of it made her throat close. "No," Elara whispered. "No." He was healed. His arm was. "The feeding reversed the surface damage," Soren said sharply. "But the curse is rooted deeper, in his core. And when he fought, when he channeled that much power into protecting you," he stopped, his jaw clenching. "It drained him. The curse is compensating, accelerating." Theron's grip on Kaelin tightened, his orange eyes blazing. "How long?" Soren was silent for a beat too long. That silence was an answer in itself. "Hours. Maybe less." "Damn it." Theron's voice cracked. "We need to get him to the chamber. Now." They moved as one, Theron hauling Kalen's weight across his shoulders, Soren leading the way through the citadel's corridors, Elara running behind them, her bare feet slapping against the freezing stone. Her mind was screaming. Kalen had saved her. He'd thrown himself between her and a crossbow, shielded her with his body, fought an army to keep her safe, and now he was dying because of it. The chamber was deep in the heart of the citadel, a circular room carved from black obsidian, the floor etched with glowing blue runes that pulsed like a heartbeat. The air smelled like ozone and ancient magic, sharp and electric. When Theron laid Kalen down on the stone altar in the center, the runes flared brighter. Kalen's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. The stone had reached his collarbone now, creeping up his neck in thin, vein-like cracks. Elara felt something in her chest break. "Do something," she said, her voice shaking. "Soren, do something. I can't." Soren's hands were moving over the runes, his fingers tracing patterns that made the light shimmer. But his expression was bleak. The curse is too deep. It's wrapped around his heart. "Elara, if I try to extract it manually, it'll kill him. Then what do we do?" Soren looked at her. The desperation in his smoke-colored eyes made her pulse spike. The soul bind. "It's the only thing strong enough to reverse this. But it's not." He stopped, his voice roughening. "It's not what we planned. We were supposed to ease you into it. Take our time. Make sure you understood the cost. But Kalen doesn't have time." Elara's hands fisted at her sides. "Then do it. Now." "You don't understand." Soren moved closer, his tall frame looming over her. His scent, dried sage and burning parchment, was laced with something raw. "Fear. The soul bind isn't gentle. It's not a ritual you walk into unprepared. It will burn you, Elara. It will rewrite your entire essence, tie you to the citadel, to us, in ways that can never be undone. You'll feel everything we feel, our pain, our hunger, our—" He stopped, his jaw working. "Our need, and it's permanent. Once it's done, you can never leave, never return to your human life. You'll be ours forever." Elara stared at him, at the anguish carved into his sharp features, at the way his hands were trembling. Then she looked past him, at Kalen lying on the altar, his chest barely rising, the stone creeping closer to his heart with every passing second. "I don't care," she whispered. Soren's breath hitched. "Elara, I don't care." Her voice was stronger now, steady. "I don't care about the cost. I don't care about the pain. I don't care if I can never go back to the valley." She stepped closer, her gaze locking with Soren's. "He saved my life. You all did. And I'm not going to stand here and watch him turn to stone because I was too afraid to save him back." Theron made a choked sound from where he stood beside the altar, his blood-orange scent thick with grief and something that might have been hope. "You mean that?" "Yes. Even knowing you'll be bound to us? Even knowing you'll never be free?" Elara looked at him, at the way his massive frame was hunched over Kalen's body like he was trying to shield him from death itself, at the orange glow of his eyes, dimmed with fear. Something in her chest ached. "I'm already not free," she said quietly. "I haven't been free since I walked up that mountain, since I stepped into this citadel and you all decided I was worth saving, since Kalen carried me through a blizzard, and Soren showed me the truth, and you fought an army to keep me alive." Her voice cracked. "I don't want to be free. I want to be yours." The silence that followed was deafening. Soren's expression shattered. He turned away, his shoulders rigid, his hands clenching into fists. Theron's breath came out ragged. When he looked at her, his orange eyes were glassy. "You're sure?" It wasn't a question. It was a plea. "I'm sure." "Then we do it now." Soren's voice was tight, controlled. When he turned back to face her, his smoke-colored eyes were burning. "But I need you to understand something first. The bond requires all three of us. Kalen, Theron, and me. You have to accept all of us, bind yourself to all of us, or it won't work. And once it starts, there's no stopping it. No turning back. Are you ready for that?" Elara's pulse was thundering, but she nodded. "Yes." Soren moved to the altar, his hands hovering over Kaelin's chest. The blue runes on the floor flared brighter, casting sharp shadows across the chamber. "The ritual is called the Triad Bind," he said, his voice falling into the clinical tone he used when he was trying to stay calm. "It requires a catalyst, someone with enough life force to anchor 3 souls. That's you. And it requires 3 anchors. The ones who will tie themselves to the catalyst. That's us." Theron stepped closer to Elara, his massive frame casting her in shadow. His scent, worn leather, steel, blood orange, wrapped around her like a living thing. "It's going to hurt," he said bluntly. "The magic will tear through you, rewrite your blood, your bones, your soul, and you'll feel us. Everything we are. Everything we've been holding back." Elara swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" "It means you'll know how much we want you." Theron's voice dropped, rough and low. "How much we've wanted you since the moment you stepped through those gates. How hard it's been to keep our hands gentle. To hold back. To pretend we're not half feral with the need to claim you." Heat flooded Elara's face, but she didn't look away. "And after the bond? After the bond, you'll be immortal," Soren said. "You'll stop aging. You'll heal faster. You'll be stronger, sharper, more resilient, but you'll also be tied to the Citadel's magic. If you leave for too long, the bond will start to fray. You'll weaken, and so will we." His gaze softened. "You'll be our queen, Elara. Our anchor, our heart, and we'll be your guardians, your protectors, your mates." The word came from Kaelin. Elara's head snapped toward the altar, her heart leaping. Kaelin's pale eyes were open. Barely. Just slits of winter sky. But he was awake. His voice was a rasp, broken and weak. But he was looking at her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to life. "Kaelin." Elara moved to his side, her hands reaching for his. His fingers closed around hers with a grip that was too weak, too fragile. "Don't talk. Save your strength. Need to." He stopped, his breath hitching. She saw the stone creeping up his jaw now, turning his skin gray. "Need you to know. The bond. It's not just magic. It's..." He coughed, his chest heaving. The sound was wet. "Wrong. It's a mating bond. Makes you ours. Forever." Elara's throat closed. "I know. You deserve better." Kaelin's eyes fluttered shut. His voice was barely a whisper. "Deserve someone who's not dying." "Shut up." Elara's voice broke. She leaned down, pressing her forehead to his. "You're not dying. I won't let you." Kaelin's lips twitched into something that might have been a smile. "Stubborn. You have no idea." His hand tightened around hers. When he opened his eyes again, they were blazing. "If we do this, if you bind yourself to us, there's no going back. You'll be stuck with us. 3 feral titans who can't keep their hands off you. Who will fight anyone who looks at you wrong? Who will burn the world if it means keeping you safe?" Elara's chest ached. "Sounds perfect." Kaelin's laugh was broken. A tear slipped down his temple, cutting through the stone, spreading across his skin. "I love you," he whispered. "Shouldn't, but I do." Elara's breath stopped. She stared at him, at the way his pale eyes were locked on hers. Raw and desperate and honest. Something inside her chest cracked open. "I love you too," she whispered back. Then she looked at Theron, at the way his orange eyes were wide and glassy. At Soren, at the way his expression had gone soft and aching. "I love all of you." Theron made a choked sound, his hands coming up to cover his face. Soren turned away, his shoulders shaking. "Then let's do this," Soren said roughly. "Before I lose my nerve." The ritual required blood. Soren explained it clinically. How the Triad Bind needed a physical anchor, a way to tie their essences together. The easiest method was through shared blood, a cut on each of their palms. Pressed together. The magic channeled through the contact. Elara didn't hesitate. She held out her hand. Soren produced a small blade from his belt. Obsidian, carved with runes. Humming with power. He pressed the edge to her palm. She felt the sharp sting as it sliced through skin. Blood welled up, hot and red. Soren's jaw clenched as he cut his own palm with the same blade. Theron went next, his massive hand dwarfing the knife. Then Kalen. Soren had to help him, had to hold his wrist steady because the stone had locked his fingers. When all four of them had bleeding palms, Soren positioned them around the altar. "Elara in the center," he said. "Hands out. We'll press our palms to yours, and the runes will do the rest." Elara stepped onto the altar, her bare feet cold against the obsidian. Kalen was lying beneath her, his chest barely rising. She knelt beside him, her heart hammering, and held out her hands. Soren took her right hand. His smoke-colored eyes locked on hers. Theron took her left, his orange gaze burning. And Kalen reached up with his one working hand and pressed his bleeding palm to her chest, right over her heart. The runes exploded. Light, blinding, golden, searing, erupted from the floor, spiraling up the walls, engulfing them in a vortex of magic that felt like being set on fire. Elara screamed. She couldn't help it. The pain was overwhelming, tearing through her veins like molten glass, rewriting every cell, every breath, every thought. She felt Soren's hand tighten on hers, felt Theron's claws dig into her skin, felt Kalen's palm burn against her chest like a brand. And then she felt them. Soren's mind, sharp and brilliant and terrified. 1,000 calculations running at once, trying to control the magic, trying to keep it from consuming her. Theron's heart, wild and fierce and protective, a snarling beast that would tear the world apart to keep her safe. Kalen's soul, broken and desperate and so relieved, clinging to her like she was the only thing keeping him alive. The bond snapped into place. Elara felt it like a physical click, 3 golden threads wrapping around her heart, tying her to them, and them to her. Suddenly, she could feel everything. Their pain, their hunger, their love. It poured into her like a flood, drowning her, overwhelming her. She was burning, burning, burning. And then the stone on Kalen's chest shattered. The gray texture cracked, splintering into 1,000 pieces. Golden light poured out from beneath it, washing over his skin, turning it back to flesh. The cracks sealed. The stone receded. Kalen gasped, his back arching off the altar, his hand pressing harder against her chest as if he could pull her into him. "Elara!" he choked out. His voice was strong again. Alive again. Gods. Elara. The light faded. Elara collapsed forward, her forehead pressing against Kalen's chest. She felt his arms come up around her. Strong. Whole. Alive. Theron's hand was still gripping hers, his breathing ragged. Soren's fingers were trembling against her skin. "It worked," Soren whispered. His voice was shaking. It actually worked. Theron's laugh was broken, half-sob. He pulled Elara into his chest, crushing her against him. "You're ours," he breathed into her hair. "You're ours." Elara couldn't speak, couldn't think. All she could do was feel the bond humming in her chest, warm and golden and right, and the 3 of them wrapped around her like she was the most precious thing in the world. She wasn't a sacrifice anymore. She was their queen, and they were hers. Elara couldn't breathe. The bond was still burning through her veins, golden fire racing through every nerve, every cell, rewriting her from the inside out. She was kneeling on the altar, Kalen's arms wrapped around her waist, Theron's hand gripping her shoulder, Soren's fingers still pressed against her palm. She could feel them, not just their touch, but their souls. 3 presences anchored to her heart, humming with life and warmth and desperate, overwhelming relief. Kalen's chest was heaving beneath her cheek, his skin warm and whole, no trace of gray anywhere. She pulled back to look at him, her hands trembling as they traced the path where the stone had been, up his arm, across his chest, along his jaw. He caught her wrist, his pale eyes blazing. "I can feel you," he whispered. His voice was rough with awe. "Inside me. Your warmth. Your heartbeat. I can feel you too." Elara's voice shook. It was true. She could feel the steady rhythm of his pulse syncing with hers, could feel the way his relief was so profound it made her eyes sting. All of you. Al. Theron's hand tightened on her shoulder, his orange eyes wide. You're glowing. Elara looked down at herself and froze. Her skin was luminous, not bright enough to hurt, but shimmering with a faint golden light that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. The oversized tunic she wore, Kalen's tunic, looked almost translucent against the glow. When she lifted her hand, she saw the light concentrated in her palm, where Soren had cut her. The wound was gone, healed completely. Not even a scar. The bond rewrote you, Soren said quietly. He was staring at her with something that looked like reverence, his smoke-colored eyes tracking the light beneath her skin. You're not human anymore, Elara. Not entirely. He stopped, his breath catching. You're a conduit, a living anchor for the Citadel's magic. What does that mean? Alara's voice was steadier now, stronger. She realized with a jolt that she felt stronger. Her muscles didn't ache, her lungs didn't burn. Even the cold that had been a constant pressure since she'd arrived at the Citadel was gone, replaced by a warmth that radiated from her core. It means you're the heart of this place now, Theron said. His voice was rough, his hand sliding from her shoulder to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. The magic flows through you. The wards, the weather, the life of the Citadel. It all answers to you. Elara's pulse spiked. I don't know how to control that. You don't have to. Soren stepped closer, his tall frame casting her in shadow. His scent, dried sage and burning parchment, was laced with something electric. The bond will guide you. We will teach you. But right now, he stopped, his gaze lifting to the chamber walls. His expression shifted into something sharp. Alert. Do you feel that? Elara went still, focusing inward, and that's when she felt it. A pulse, deep and rhythmic, like a second heartbeat thrumming beneath her own. It was coming from the Citadel. The stone beneath her feet was warm now, the blue runes glowing brighter. She could feel the magic waking up, ancient and vast, hungry for the warmth she was radiating. The wards are responding to her, Soren breathed. The bond is feeding them. How? Elara asked. Just feel it. The heat inside you. And let it flow. Elara closed her eyes, her hands fisting in Kalen's tunic. She reached for the golden fire humming in her chest. It responded immediately, surging up like a wave. She let it pour out, through her skin, through the altar, through the floor, and the chamber exploded with light. The wave of energy that erupted from Elara was blinding. Golden light flooded the chamber, racing across the obsidian floor, spiraling up the walls, bursting outward through the stone itself. She felt it tear through the Citadel like a wildfire, igniting every dormant ward, every fractured rune, every piece of magic that had been slowly dying for 500 years. The cold that had gripped the fortress for centuries shattered, replaced by a warmth so profound it made the air shimmer, and then the wave kept going. Elara gasped as she felt it punch through the Citadel walls, racing down the mountain in a cascading torrent of heat and light. She could see it through the bond, could see the snow melting in its path, the ice cracking, the frozen waterfalls roaring back to life. The eternal winter that had gripped the valley for 100 years was breaking, shattering beneath the force of her warmth. And she couldn't stop it. Didn't want to stop it. Elara, Kalen's voice was awed, his arms tightening around her. Look at me. She opened her eyes. The world had changed. Everything was sharper now. The details of Kalen's face so vivid she could count every scar, every fleck of silver in his pale eyes. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, syncing perfectly with her own. Could smell the crushed ice and amber that clung to his skin. Sweeter now, laced with something that smelled like relief. And when she looked past him, at Theron and Soren, she saw them differently too. Theron's orange eyes were no longer just glowing. They were burning, bright and fierce and alive. The stone that had crept up his arms was gone, his skin whole and scarred and perfect. Soren's silver-streaked hair caught the golden light. His smoke-colored eyes were wide with wonder. The tension that had lived in his shoulders for as long as she'd known him had melted away. They were healed. Completely. "You did it," Soren whispered. "Elara, you broke the curse." "We broke it," she corrected, her voice steady. "Together." Theron's laugh was rough, almost broken. He reached for her, pulling her off the altar and into his arms. She expected him to be gentle. He was always so careful with her, so terrified of breaking her. But this time, his grip was fierce, possessive. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling deeply. "You smell different," he murmured against her temple. His voice was thick with emotion. "Still cinnamon and old books. But now there's—" He stopped, his breath catching. "Fire. You smell like ours." Elara's chest tightened. She felt the bond hum in response. 3 golden threads wrapped around her heart, connecting her to them in ways that felt more real than her own skin. She could feel Theron's overwhelming protectiveness, Soren's quiet awe, Kaelin's bone-deep relief. And it was almost too much. Almost. "Let me see her," Kaelin said. Theron reluctantly released her, though his hand stayed on her waist like he couldn't stand to not be touching her. Kaelin stood slowly, testing his weight. Elara watched as he flexed his left hand, the one that had been stone just minutes ago. His fingers moved smoothly. No grinding, no cracks. When he looked at her, his pale eyes were glassy. "I didn't think I'd ever feel whole again," he said quietly. "I thought I'd turn to stone and spend eternity frozen in that gallery with the others. But you," his voice cracked, "you gave me my life back." Elara stepped forward, closing the distance between them. She pressed her palm to his chest. She could feel his heartbeat beneath her hand, strong and steady. The warmth radiating between them was almost overwhelming. "You gave me mine first," she said. "When you caught me at the gates, when you refused to let me freeze. You saved me, Kaelin. All of you did. And now you've saved us," Soren said softly. He moved to stand beside them, his hand reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. The touch was so gentle it made her breath catch. "You're ours now. Truly. Our queen. Our anchor. Our—" The citadel roared. The sound was deafening. A deep, resonant vibration that shook the chamber, rattling the obsidian walls. Elara felt it through the bond. The magic was still surging, still pouring out of her in waves, and it was reaching the valley below. She could feel the snow melting, the ice breaking, the frozen earth cracking open as warmth flooded back into the land for the first time in a century. "The winter," Soren breathed, his eyes wide. "It's ending." They found the windows in the highest tower, a narrow chamber overlooking the valley. When Elara looked down, her breath stopped. The village was green. Everywhere the golden wave had touched, the snow had melted, revealing grass and wildflowers that had been buried for 100 years. The frozen river that cut through the valley was flowing again, glittering in the sunlight. Sunlight, real sunlight. Breaking through the storm clouds for the first time since Elara could remember. Trees were budding. Fields that had been barren were suddenly lush. In the center of the village, people were emerging from their homes, staring up at the peak with expressions of shock and wonder. Elara pressed her hands against the window, her heart pounding. "They can see it. They can feel it," Kaelin said from behind her. His hands came to rest on her shoulders, his grip warm and steady. "The bond doesn't just affect the citadel. It affects the entire mountain, the valley. The magic that's been locked away for centuries is flowing again, and they're going to know it came from here. Will they come back?" Elara's voice was tight. "The elders, the iron casters. Will they try again?" "Let them try." Theron's voice was a growl. When Elara looked at him, his orange eyes were blazing. "They'll have to go through us first." "They won't," Soren said calmly. He was standing by the window, his gaze fixed on the valley, his expression calculating. "Look at them. They're not preparing for war. They're celebrating." He was right. Elara could see it now. People dancing in the streets, children running through the grass, farmers kneeling in their fields, touching the earth with trembling hands. The village wasn't mourning the loss of their sacrifice. They were rejoicing in the return of spring. A horn sounded from below, deep and resonant, the signal for a gathering. Elara watched as the villagers began to converge on the square. Elder Thorn was there, his face pale and drawn. Beside him were the few ironcasters who had survived Theron's rampage. They were battered, bloodied. When they looked up at the citadel, their expressions weren't filled with rage. They were filled with fear. "They know they made a mistake," Soren murmured. "They tried to kill the one thing that could save them. And now they're terrified we'll retaliate. Will we?" Elara asked quietly. Kaylin's hands tightened on her shoulders. "That's not our decision to make. It's yours." Elara turned to look at him, her pulse spiking. "Mine? You're the queen," Kaylin said simply. "The bond flows through you. The magic answers to you. And the valley?" He gestured to the window. "The valley is yours to protect. Or punish. We'll follow your lead." Elara looked at Theron. At the way his jaw was clenched, his hands fisted like he was ready to tear down the mountain if she asked. Then at Soren, at the quiet trust in his smoke-colored eyes, and finally back at Kaylin. At the way he was watching her, like she was the only thing that mattered. They meant it. They would burn the valley to ash if she wanted, would rain vengeance down on the people who had tried to kill her. But Elara had never wanted vengeance. "I want to talk to them," she said. The walk down the mountain was different this time. Elara wasn't barefoot, wasn't freezing, wasn't stumbling through a blizzard toward her death. She was wearing a gown that Soren had found in the Citadel's archives. Deep blue silk embroidered with silver runes. Elegant and regal. It fit her perfectly. Her hair was braided with threads of gold, her skin still shimmering faintly with the bond's light. And when she walked, the 3 titans flanked her like guardians. Kaylin on her right, his black armor polished to a gleam, his pale eyes scanning the path ahead. Theron on her left, his wild hair tied back, his expression fierce and protective. Soren behind her, his silver-streaked hair catching the sunlight, his presence a constant, steady anchor. They reached the village gates just as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky gold and pink and impossibly beautiful. The villagers had gathered in the square, hundreds of them, silent and wide-eyed. When Elara stepped through the gates, they bowed. All of them, even Elder Thorn. Elara stopped, her breath catching. She felt Kaylin's hand brush hers, a silent reassurance. She stepped forward, her chin lifting, her voice carried across the square with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "You sent me to die." The words were steady, clear. "You dressed me in white silk and bound my wrists and pushed me up that mountain, expecting the monsters to devour me. But they didn't. They saved me. They gave me a choice, and I chose them." The silence was deafening. "The eternal winter is over," Elara continued. "Spring has returned because the bond between the citadel and the valley has been restored. But that bond is not unconditional. It requires respect, trust, and understanding." She looked directly at Elder Thorn, her gaze hard. "You tried to kill me because you thought my blood would appease your gods. You were wrong. The Titans don't want blood. They want what they've always wanted, a connection, a partner, someone who will stand with them and protect this land." Thorn's face was ashen, but he didn't speak. "I am that partner now," Elara said. "I am their queen, and I am your guardian. The valley will prosper under my protection. But if you ever send another tribute to the peak expecting death, I will end that practice myself. Do you understand?" Thorn nodded shakily. "Yes, my queen." The title sent a shiver down Elara's spine, but she didn't let it show. She turned to the crowd, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the people who had condemned her, and then softened. "The winter is over. Plant your crops, rebuild your homes, live your lives. And when the harvest comes, send your thanks to the citadel, not in blood, but in grain and fruit and celebration. We will protect you, but you will respect us." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and then someone, a farmer, old and weathered, stepped forward and knelt. "Thank you, my queen." One by one, the rest of the village followed. The throne room in the citadel was ancient and vast, carved from black obsidian and lit by blue flames that danced without heat. The throne itself was massive, built for titans, not humans. But when Elara sat in it, the stone warmed beneath her, molding to her body like it had been waiting for her all along. Kalen stood on her right, his hand resting on the back of the throne, his pale eyes soft as he looked at her. Theron stood on her left, his arms crossed, his orange gaze burning with pride. Soren stood before her, his smoke-colored eyes gleaming with something that looked like awe. "You were magnificent," Soren said quietly. Elara smiled. "I just told them the truth." "You claimed your power," Kalen corrected. His hand moved to her shoulder, his thumb brushing the bare skin of her neck. The touch sent warmth flooding through the bond. "You stood in front of the people who tried to kill you and made them kneel. That's not just truth, Elara. That's strength. Our strength," Theron added. His voice was rough, but his expression was soft. "You're ours. And we're yours. That's all that matters." Elara reached up, her hand covering Kalen's. She felt the bond hum in response. Golden and warm and unbreakable. She could feel them through it. Could feel the way they were looking at her with a reverence that made her chest ache. She wasn't a sacrifice. She wasn't a prisoner. She was their queen, their anchor, their heart, and they were hers. Outside the citadel, the valley bloomed. Spring had come to the mountain for the first time in 500 years. The people below celebrated beneath a sky that was finally, beautifully clear. The eternal winter was over. The curse was broken, and in the highest tower of the ice citadel, 3 ancient titans stood guard over the woman who had saved them all. Elara leaned back in the throne, her hand still wrapped in Kalen's, and smiled. She was home.